Good evening and welcome to Now is the Time to Get Prepared. And I'm going to do something a little different tonight than I've normally done in the past because I'm actually going to try turning on my webcam. And I don't know if you can see me, but because my audience view doesn't seem to be show. Yeah, okay, good. So I'm going to just go back and forth between the PowerPoint presentation and the webcam. And I wanted to talk just briefly about why I'm doing this webinar. I've been interested in emergency preparedness since my teenage years. I had some interesting spiritual experiences which I've talked about in some other places that I've written, so I'm not going to talk about them tonight. When I was young, that made me concerned that I might live to see a day when we'd have some serious problems with Western civilization. I've never felt panicky or alarmed about this. It's just a matter-of-fact thing. So I've spent a lot of years studying preparedness, trying to be prepared. But I've never felt like there was a that I was like almost upon that until this year, and so I feel a very strong urge that it's really important right now to more than ever to get prepared. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about my take on what's happening and why I think that there's a concern right now that we should be looking at. And then, and to do that, I've got to start off by talking a little bit about economics. So I apologize, but I need to give you this like short discussion. There's a reason why I put the American $1 bill and the Monopoly 1 bill out at the bottom is because both of them are pieces of paper. One of them we perceive as having value, and so we take it as money. The other one is just something we use in a game, but they're both pieces of paper. And a lot of people don't really understand that economics is really based on barter. It's the exchange of goods and services. And what money is a medium or a go-between that makes exchange easier. So if we lived in just a strictly barter society, I might not be producing, you might be producing something I want, but I might not be producing something you want. So it would be very difficult to make a trade. So society developed money as an intermediate exchange where I exchange my goods and services to get money, which represents the value that I created, and then I take that medium of exchange and I trade it with you to get value from you. And the whole system of money works on trusting that that intermedium of exchange is going to have value, that I'm going to be able to turn around and exchange it for what I need and want, or I'm not going to accept it from you. Traditionally, over the course of human history, the gold or silver became the normal standard of trade, and that's why people started coining money. Basically, a coin was simply a piece of gold or silver or other precious metal that had a stamp on it that basically said it contains this much gold or it contains this much silver, and it made it convenient for people who were trading to know how much gold or silver they were trading. And so because gold and silver had some intrinsic value, and they were also very durable, meaning that you could carry them around, they didn't wear out very easily, they became a preferred method of exchange. So what happened with the development of banking is banks initially started off as secure warehouses, vaults where people could store their gold or silver or other valuables, where they'd be locked in a safe, they'd be have a guard to protect them. And so when you took your gold or silver to the bank, the bank would then issue you a note. A note is a promise to pay, and it has 4 characteristics. It says who is going to pay, what they're going to pay, to whom they're going to pay it, and when they will pay it. So a bank note would basically say that the bank was going to pay a certain amount of gold or a certain amount of silver to the person who held the note on demand. So this, some of the original money we had were gold and silver certificates. This is an example of one. Dollar was a unit of weight of precious metal. So $100 of silver or $100 of gold would be a certain amount. It'd be saying like, 6 quarts of milk or 4 pounds of butter, or a dozen eggs. Okay, it's a unit of measurement of precious metals, and basically the notes would say that in this case, the United States Treasury would pay to the bearer, to the person who held the note, on demand. That's the when, and then the amount, $100 in gold, and so people would then turn and exchange the notes instead of exchanging the actual gold or silver, and then the person who wanted the gold or silver could go to the bank and redeem it. Meanwhile, the banks would be loaning out the gold and silver to other people for various reasons to, earn interest. Wow, it's just a backfire on a car outside of the window. So Federal Reserve notes are very interesting. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, the Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank. It's actually not owned by the United States government, contrary to what a lot of people believe. No one knows for sure who the owners are, but an act in 1914 set up the Federal Reserve to basically control, as the bank of last resort, to lend money, because banks would get run-ons. People would lose confidence in the bank, and so they'd want to go take their gold and silver out, but the gold and silver was, loaned out to other people. So the bank would run out of gold and silver to redeem the notes, create a run on the bank, cause problems. So the Federal Reserve became the lender of last resort to basically bail out the banks when there was a run on the banks. The Federal Reserve basically controls the money supply in the U.S. Except the interesting thing about the Federal Reserve is that the Federal Reserve notes are loaned into the economy. In other words, the notes are created, and you notice it says on there, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. The note is actually a note of indebtedness to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve note is basically the property of the Federal Reserve. It's owed to the Federal Reserve. It was loaned into the economy with interest. So basically it eventually has to be paid back to the Federal Reserve with whatever interest is owed on it, which is kind of ironic, because instead of nowadays trading something of value like gold or silver, we actually trade IOUs. I take my note that's a debt to the Federal Reserve and give it to you, so that you take. So it's basically, people call it a debt-based economy. So that's why it says this note, which is a promise to pay, but it's actually not a promise to pay you, it's a promise to pay the Federal Reserve, is a legal tender or a legal offer of payment for all debts. So translated, this means, this IOU means I've legally offered you payment for what I owe you. So we're basically trading IOUs, and this is known as a fiat money system. Basically, all of the monetary systems in the world now are fiat money systems, pretty much. But this is what kind of sets up for the problem that we've got, because most people just don't understand that value is not found in money. Money is a symbolic representation of value. It isn't the actual value. The actual value is the goods and services that people create through their labor. So a farmer who grows a crop creates value because he creates food. A builder who builds a home creates value because he builds homes for people. A lumberjack who cuts timber and produces boards to make those homes is producing value because they're making something people use. People who make clothing, the goods and services that we buy, that's value. And how do we know this? Because the only reason we want money is to trade it for things we value. And so money is just the intermediate representation of value. And so it's really important to understand that the purchasing power of money is always in balance with the supply of goods and services that are being produced in an economy. So if you increase the money supply, that doesn't increase the amount of goods and services. So therefore, the value of the money in terms of what it will buy in goods and services goes down. And that's actually, ironically, the way they talk about these things in economic terms. They call that inflation, but it's really a loss of value of the money. So, you know, all of you have heard of the housing bubble of 2008. So what happens is the banks basically make available money to the economy through loaning it out for various purposes. And they were doing lots of loans for people to buy houses. So because loans were more readily available for people to buy houses, what that did is that allowed the bidding price to go up because there was more money available to purchase homes, and therefore the quote unquote, the value of the home didn't change. The value of the money changed. The money was worth less because there was more of it available to buy homes, which made it look like the value of the house went up, but the value of a house is the value of a house. It's something we need. It's the value of the money that was shifting, that was pushing the housing prices up, and that's called a bubble. So what happens is at a certain period of time, the bubble bursts, and that's what happened in 2008, is the housing bubble burst. And when the housing bubble burst, then property values begin to collapse, to come down more in line with what the real value of the money and everything is. So if there's less money in circulation, then they call that deflation, but actually that's the prices go down because the prices have to reflect the supply of money. So when you understand this, then you understand that when the government, borrows money, or the Federal Reserve, what happened in 2008 when the Federal Reserve stepped in and loaned a whole bunch of new money into the economy, they basically inflated the money supply, all right? And they inflated the money supply to basically stop the system from collapsing. What I want to talk about is the first major concern, and I'll turn the webcam back on, and that is a financial crisis. At some point, okay, as you keep pumping money into the economy, because the fact is that because the money was loaned into the economy in the first place, there's never actually enough money in the economy to pay off all the debt. So you have to keep inflating the money supply in order for people to be able to keep paying their debts, which all countries in the world ever who have had a fiat money system eventually go into a situation of hyperinflation and the money system collapses. It's something that has happened everywhere this has been tried. and I think it's going to happen again. I mean, part of the reason why this is happening is, and I'm not just, by the way, I realize that I could spend a lot of time trying to lay this all out because I've studied all this stuff quite extensively, but there's also one of the reasons why the system is going to have a problem is because it's largely based on demographics. And so the baby boomer generation, of which I'm a part, I'm sitting smack dab in the middle of the baby boomer generation, which was right after the close of World War II, 1945, 46, up until the mid-60s, and I was born in 54. This was the biggest generation of people ever born in the history of the world. And so when the baby boomer generation went into their middle age, which is the time when people work the hardest and produce the most goods and services because they're trying to take care of their families, then the economy booms because there's a lot of goods and services. Housing booms, all these things boom. Well, the baby boomer generation is retiring. They're bowing out. So as they pull their labor out of the economy, the amount of goods and services begins to diminish. And then at the same time, you have all of this money and debt that's basically not real wealth. It's not backed by anything. It's just paper. Now it's just even numbers in computers. So it's basically a system of trading credit, trading on numbers in computers. And at some point, it will start to implode. Now, I don't think that's a doomsday scenario, because governments will probably come in and replace it with something else, but it's going to create, whenever this happens, and it's really not a matter of if it happens at this point, it's only a matter of when it happens, and whatever will trigger it, then there's going to be a period of disruption, maybe anywhere from a month to several months, to kind of get things flowing again, because you're going to have issues with the flow of money, because the credit system will break down. And so people will want cash. People will want real payments. The access to the credit cards and things won't be there, because people won't trust that they're going to get paid. And I could go into a lot more detail on that, but it's a big concern. I don't think it's any kind of a doomsday prediction. I think it's just common sense. And just as an illustration of why I think this way, in the mid-1990s, I went in to buy a car for my wife, and the salesman came out after checking my credit, and he says, "I can't believe it." He says, "You have a perfect credit score." He says, "I've never seen anybody with a perfect credit score before, but you have a perfect credit score." In other words, whatever it is, top credit score, 800 or whatever, I had it. I had really, really taken good care of my credit, paid my bills on time, never made late payments, on and on and on like that. And 4 years later, I went bankrupt. So I went from having a perfect credit score to going bankrupt in 4 years, and I won't go into the details why, but it was because I got in debt because of a bunch of problems that occurred. I got in debt over my head, and eventually it buried me. Well, that's what's happening in this country, is the debt is accumulating on multiple levels, and eventually the whole system gets in over its head in debt, and it goes kapooey and has to basically reset. Now, this leads to another thing I want to talk about, which is the, let me just pull the screen so I get back to my PowerPoint, which is the idea of international strife. You probably noticed that there's a lot of conflict going on in the world. And one of the reasons why this conflict is going on is because one of the things that has kept the American economy propped up is that the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. Now, what that means is that the in international trade, the standard of currency for international trade, especially for oil, is the US dollar. So other countries want US dollars in order to be able to buy oil and other commodities on the international market. So we're able to produce US dollars and other countries will readily take them. And this has been true for quite some time. As many of you may know, 2/3 of our national debt is owned by China. In other words, China has bought up our treasury bonds and basically owns about 2/3 of America's debt. So what we've been doing is, because China wanted dollars to build up its economy, because it's the world trade thing, we got cheap goods out of China, but then in China, instead of buying American goods back, basically lent our money back to our government and then put it back into circulation. Then we buy goods from China, and it circles around. Except the Chinese economy, because they've limited the number of children people have, doesn't have enough generation coming up of workforce to keep the economy afloat, and the Chinese economy is starting to tank, which means they're going to want to collect their debts, and they're not going to want to buy the debt anymore. So that's one of the things that could happen in the world. And there are a number of countries, Russia, number of the countries that we're in global conflict with. What the real basis of that conflict is these countries want to switch to a gold-based currency or some other currency besides the US dollar, and that threatens the security of America. So America uses its military power to basically try to prevent any of these countries from adopting some other standard of currency. So the global strife is going to continue as other countries lose faith in the American dollar and want to pull out of the current international system. And so there's a lot of potential for conflict and war to break out. And war is also a way that sometimes governments use when the economy tanks to try to keep the economy afloat. Now, just like there was a collapse in the 1930s of the economy and it had to reset. Oh, wait a second, I said those in wrong order. I've got to come back for a second. I talked about global conflict and I should have been talking about the strife. The issue with the apologize for that thing. The issue with the internal strife is this, okay? In the 1930s, most people lived on farms. They lived in rural environments. So when the economy collapsed, there were a lot of people who still had the capability of basically growing their own food, taking care of their own needs. And the country was probably more united. Right now, if you just look at what's going on in the political spectrum, a lot of contention in the country, a lot of factions, a lot of divisions, and so forth. And so if we have an economic meltdown, then I would say that there's a lot more chance of rioting, looting, whatever, than there was in the 30s. Therefore, okay, this is one of the reasons why we want to be prepared, is because we want to be prepared if we have to, evacuate a place that's unsafe, which some major metropolitan areas could become unsafe, or at least be able to have something to weather a storm while things kind of get reset and go back to normal. So I'm going to basically close down the webcam for a second again and go back to my PowerPoint. So I never think in terms of doomsday. I'm just not a doomsday person. I'm actually quite an optimistic person. Conflicts and problems have happened throughout history. They've happened in many parts of the world. The thing is not to sit there and panic and be all scared or whatever. That's the worst thing you can do in any crisis, is to panic or be scared. But you're less likely to panic and be scared if something happens that's a major problem if you've done some things to basically be ready, and so what I'm talking about is developing, first of all, an attitude of self-reliance. If you look at what happened at Hurricane Katrina, you look at what happened with Hurricane Sandy, a lot of people are overly dependent on the idea that if there's an emergency or some kind of major problem, that the government's going to bail them out. And that, what I call the entitlement mentality, a lot of people call it an entitlement mentality, really makes people not think about or prepare for caring for their own needs. I personally don't, the government is very slow to get things going with Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina. And in a situation like this, you can expect that it would take time to pull in emergency resources. So knowledge, skill, and preparation are all essential components of self-reliance, and you can't acquire those things after an emergency occurs. You've got to acquire them before the emergency occurs. And one of the things I want to stress here is that positive thinking is not denial. A lot of people think that if you think about, what problems might occur and anticipate them, that your thoughts are going to create them. And that's not really what positive thinking is about. Positive thinking isn't burying your head in the sand like an ostrich and pretending that there aren't any problems in the world and everything's all peachy keen and everything's always going to be all peachy keen and everything. It's facing the fact that there are difficulties and problems in the world, and that, but having confidence that I can do something about it, that I have the ability to weather the storm, to find solutions to the problems and so forth. That's what positive thinking is really all about. Napoleon Hill, who was one of the authors of this whole positive thinking idea, called it accurate thinking. It's about having confidence that whatever the situation, we can cope with it. So you're going to be far better off if you have thought about some of the possible scenarios of what could happen and made some kind of at least attempt at some preparation, some forethought, or whatever you can do. So these are some things I would like to encourage you to think about. What if you were unable to access the money from your bank? I've been subscribing to a newsletter from Bill Bronner, who owns what I understand to be the largest independent financial research company in the world, and he's put out a video talking about this particular problem, which I will probably put a link to that video on the page. It's very well worth watching. You don't have to, he's urging you at the end to subscribe to his newsletter. I happen to have subscribed to his newsletter over a year ago. And I think he's got a lot of really, really good things to say. Very smart man. But he talks about that what nearly happened in 2008 is that the credit system nearly collapsed, which would have meant that you'd go and swipe your credit card, and suddenly it would be declined, even though you had available credit. Or you might go to an ATM machine to try to draw out some cash, and it wouldn't let you draw out any cash, which basically because the cash has suddenly gone into short supply because it's disappearing from the system. So one of the things you want to think about is what would you do if you suddenly didn't have access to the money in your bank account? What if, because there was some kind of an emergency, which could be an emergency like Hurricane Sandy or something like that, or it could be this major breakdown of the economy that is going to happen at some point. What if you had to stay indoors, in your house for a while because the streets were kind of unsafe, and basically maybe the grocery store shelves were swept clean anyway by looters, and you weren't able to go to the grocery store for several weeks or more to get food? What are you going to do? All right. What if the the power goes out, okay, for either because of some kind of natural disaster or because there's an economic problem. Prior to the U.S. dollar becoming the world's reserve currency, the English pound was the world's reserve currency. And when the English pound collapsed as the world's reserve currency, it took about 6 months to get the economy jump-started again. And during that period of time, there were things where like the power was on only like 3 days a week. So it's silly to think that the same thing couldn't happen to us that happened to Great Britain, which was at that time, the biggest empire in the world. This pertains to the thing as an herbalist. What happens if people around you are sick and injured or medical care is not available? What if this country gets involved in a major war and all of a sudden a whole bunch of doctors are drafted and shipped overseas to help with troops, and suddenly, medical supplies, medical care become, tight here? Then what are you going to do? And the last one is, what if you had to evacuate your home? What if you had to evacuate your home because you're in a major city and you need to get out because so obviously there's going to be some problems, or get out because of an earthquake or a hurricane or whatever. These are all things to think about. And like I said, thinking about this is not being pessimistic. It's being self-reliant. It's saying, what would I do if this system wasn't here? And because of the experiences I had in my, I was 15 and the other one was when I was 21, I've never seen the system I live in as something that I could totally depend on. I've always thought about what would happen if the system I depend on broke down. What would I do? And because I've lived like that for most of my life and thought like that most of my life, I have a lot of things that I've learned about preparedness and about so forth. So I'm going to share with you some of the basic things that I think would be useful to consider based on what I think are some of the scenarios that we could be facing. But before I do, I want to make aware that the best preparedness plan depends on a number of factors. I mean, I can't lay out what's the best solution for you, is because I happen to live outside of any major metropolitan area. I live out in the country now. I also live alone except for the one intern I have, so I don't have a big family. You also have to look at how much budget you have and what skills you have. You have a lot of skills, you don't need as many supplies. If you don't have the skills, you may need more supplies, but you want to think about the plan. You want to think about what it is, and you don't need to implement it all at once. You can implement it in stages. I don't believe this is going to happen tomorrow. It could happen later this year. It could happen next year. I don't know, but the fact is we could have, there could be a crisis anytime, honestly, but I don't think that you have to start preparing in a panic. I don't think it's wise to prepare in a panic. I think you should be thoughtful about this, and maybe even, if you believe in God, prayerful about this, just look at it. So here are the basic things you want to think about. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is evacuation. For most people who are living in any, especially major metropolitan area, one of the first things you want to think about is, what if you had to evacuate? Could you, grab some kind of kit and basically get away from the situation quickly? I made a emergency 3-day emergency preparedness kit in a backpack for all of my kids that I gave them as a Christmas gift for that purpose. I didn't give one to my son who lives here in St. George, but I need to make up a little one for him because I assume he'll come to my house. But my two kids in LA, and I have another kid up in northern Utah, and I've given them all kits because I want them to be able to evacuate. Also, you got to think about oxygen, water, heating and cooling, sanitation, first aid, food and cooking, lighting, communications, and emergency cash and barter items. So this is actually, I have a kit like this in both of my cars. And the reason I have these in my cars is because this is a kit if I live 14 miles outside of town. So if something happened when I was away from home, and not too far away from home, because if I'm way down in Southern California or in Salt Lake, this wouldn't do any good. But this is basically if I had to hoof it on foot back from St. George, I basically have a little bit of ready-to-eat food and some emergency preparedness gear and some stuff that is ready to go to give me some supplies I would need to get moving. So basically, the ones I made for my kids, they're a backpack. They contain some supplies for purifying water and a water container. They contain 3 days worth of MREs, which are military rations that are pretty much ready to eat. There's some basic first aid supplies, some cash. Now, remember I said about, the ATM or your card not working. I mean, if the power grid's down, you can't slide your card anyway. So, do you have a little bit of cash with you to get some things you need, something to protect you from the elements, a hat, a blanket, a multi-tool is really nice. A knife is really nice. A multi-tool, has a plier, screwdriver, that kind of thing. Something to start a fire with. Duct tape is always handy. That's a little miracle kind of thing. Some cordage. I have a tarp in my kits, and I have some line, some cordage that you'd use to pitch that into a shelter from the rain or whatever. The blankets I have in all my kits are wool blankets, and the reason why I chose wool is because wool stays warm even if it gets wet, which is really important. Flashlight, there's an emergency radio. I bought a little wind-up emergency radio that can also be used to recharge a cell phone that I put into my kids' kits. If you have any critical medications, like you're diabetic or something like that, you need to consider that too. And you also want to consider personal papers, like, maybe you make a photocopy of your driver's license and your passport, or some documentation in case you need to identify who you are, and so forth. And someone did mention, throwing in needs, for special members of the family, like if they're autistic or have meds, that's really important. One of the things people don't think about too much in preparation for emergencies is oxygen, but there are things that could happen where you could get dust in the air or particulate matter in the air or that kind of thing that would make breathing difficult. One of the simplest things to do is to just throw in a couple of bandanas. Like a bandit would wear in an old-time Western movie. Bandana is really handy because you could not only use it to cover your mouth, which is part of what they did, is they would, dusty, riding on the horse, you'd pull the bandana up over your mouth and nose to keep from inhaling the dust, but you can also put it around the back of your neck to shade your neck from the sun beating on it. You can use it to make a sling. There's a lot of uses for a bandana. Another thing you could put in your kit is just some dust masks, like you use in paint stores, that you could put over your mouth or nose to avoid inhaling the dust. The emergency preparedness store near where I live has little dust masks that have carbon. You can get them that have a carbon layer in them, which would help to filter out some chemicals. Worst case thing is gas mask. I don't have a gas mask, but I do have some of these things to help, filter the air in the event of an emergency. Now, water is extremely important. The I have an account, or I order things from Industrial Container and Supply in Salt Lake City. I order amber glass bottles for making flower essences, and I've ordered jars to put salve in and so forth. And they actually sell these wholesale. So I bought them. They're nice, heavy-duty, stackable containers that you can store 5 gallons of water in. Plus, I have the water I get, the purified water at the health food store, and I have several 5-gallon containers, and I try to rotate them so there's some full at all the time. But you need to have some water, and ideally you should have water for at least 3 days, and you want at least 1 gallon for each family member. Now, in an area like where I live in St. George, where it gets to be 110 or higher in the summertime, you actually need to store more water than that, because water becomes very crucial for thermic regulation, for keeping your body cool, and you evaporate, lose water a lot. You want to treat the water to preserve it. I put a tablespoon of Nature Sunshine's Silver Shield, which is Aquasol Silver, in each of my containers. The silver works in a very low dose, parts per million, to knock down bacteria, keep the water pure. But it's also good to store some water purification, something to purify water in, so that if you needed to, get some water that was questionable, you could treat it. So I put in my kit some water purification tablets, and I also keep the Silver Shield. Especially, I'm glad that they actually have it available now in plastic bottles on hand, both as something to as part of the first aid kit, but also to purify water. I've seen in the emergency preparedness things, they have little UV pens that actually are small portable UV things that you could stick into a container of water to kill microbes in it. But another really good idea is just to get a hiking water filter. You can go to any sporting goods store and get one of these little I don't know whether they're 0.5 micron or whatever water filters that basically you drop the one tube down into the water and you pump it through the thing, and it filters out all of the microbes and so forth. And that would be a very handy thing to have for an emergency, because you need water far more than you need food. I mean, you could go for some kind of larger water filtration system. There's these I think they're called Birkeland filters or whatever, but I don't see why you'd need to go that far. I think just having at least something that you can purify or treat water in the event of an emergency is useful, because that's going to be one of the critical things that you need. And another thing to really, especially in an emergency evacuation kit, is to make sure that you have clothing or materials appropriate for the climate in which you live. What if the power goes out? How are you going to stay warm, or how are you going to stay cool, depending on where the climate is? Because people die of exposure all the time. In fact, when in power outages, people die of exposure. In really hot climates, some people will die sometimes, older people, because the air conditioning goes out. In colder climates, they'll die because they get, too cold. At the very least, you want to have extra blankets on hand and some extra warm clothing that you could, bundle up in, to try to stay warm. And one of the tricks I learned from a Cody Lundin book, which I thought was really helpful for where I live, is to like get a blanket and get it damp and hang it up in front of an open window to make a kind of little evaporative cooler to help keep things cool. Because I've been here in St. George when the air conditioning goes out, and it's miserable. It's hard to sleep when it's 100, over 100 degrees. In fact, I could totally understand why the Mexicans would just take siestas in the middle of the day and work in the early mornings and work in the evening, because it's the only time you really can work effectively. Tarps are really handy. Tarps and some rope or some cordage, to pitch an emergency shelter. And that's one thing to think of, like especially if you lived in like an earthquake zone or whatever. Can you pitch something to protect you from the elements? Something to start a fire with. Obviously, matches and lighters are obvious, but in case your matches run out or lighter stops working, you might want to consider having some other kind of a fire starter and some kind of tinder to make it easier to start a fire. One of the tinders that I found in Cody Lundin's book, which I actually tried and made some, and they're really easy to make and they work really well, is just to take some ordinary cotton balls and completely coat them in Vaseline. And you only need a little teeny piece of one, and it'll take a spark quite easily, and it will burn pretty intensely, sort of like a candle for a few minutes, which is a really good way to get a fire started if like you've got, wood that's slightly damp or something like that. That's helpful. Also, you want to think in terms of sanitation. I mean, okay, think about it. The water mains are broke. What are you going to do? Now, my place, I live on an acre. I'll just have to go dig a pit in my backyard someplace out away from things. But a really simple solution if you're in a city where you can't do that is that you can get a porta potty, a camping porta potty, or you can just get a 5-gallon bucket, and you can get they actually sell little kits where you can get a 5-gallon bucket that has a seat that goes on top of it and a tight-fitting lid, and you can basically line it with a trash bag and then put the little seat on it, and then you just have a container of dirt or whatever nearby, and you just cover over the waste material with a little bit of dirt or wood ashes or whatever until it gets full, and then you carry it out and dump it. Toilet paper is really handy, not 100% necessary, but pretty convenient. So I always try to keep plenty of toilet paper in storage. And very, very important. Well, very, very important thing to keep in emergency supplies is some soap and some things to disinfect things. Vinegar is a really nice disinfectant. This is one case where chlorine bleach would be handy. The silver in an emergency kit, some antiseptic wipes, maybe a few essential oils, like a little thing of tea tree oil, which I put in my kits. Something to maybe some hand sanitizer, because the last thing you want in an emergency is to get an infection. So you want to pay really good attention to the need for sanitation. I store first aid supplies, and I basically went to Sam Kaufman's. Sam Kaufman had a class that Thomas Easley was sponsoring, and I happened to be there. I got to take it in wilderness first aid, which was really useful because I had first aid class, as a teenager, but it was really nice to get an updated first aid kit, and it prompted me to think in terms of adding a number of things to my first aid supplies in case there's an emergency. So I have another backpack. This backpack right here is at my house, and it is an emergency first responder kit for me. Basically what I have is I have some splints, I have a bunch of bandages, I have the silver gel, and I don't show them all here, but I have a whole bunch of different herbs in these little pouches that hold the liquid herbs in there. I have hot and cold packs. I have scissors, scalpel, a bunch of other things. And this little pack is, if there was an emergency or something happened, I could grab this pack and go out and help people who were injured. To basically render first aid. In my terms of emergency preparedness, I actually don't just think about myself. I actually am thinking very much about how am I going to be helpful to other people in an emergency, in a crisis, because I have a firm belief that in any kind of crisis situation, our best chance for dealing with it is to pull together with other people. And I'll talk more about that towards the end of the presentation. But one of the things that I have in here is a headlamp, a flash, because I was looking in some things that said, okay, so you're trying to treat somebody at night and you need both of your hands, these little flashlights that sit on your forehead so you can look down at what you're doing and see what you're doing. That's really, really handy. And like I said, I got a bunch of first aid supplies to be prepared to render assistance in an emergency that go beyond what I have in my own little kits. This is actually like my first aid kit for my house. Is in a tackle box, and I store a bunch of things in there just to have for just treating ordinary injuries and so forth, as well as I have, my herbs and things at the house too. The other kit, like I said, is something that's special, and I've listed here some of the things you want to think about in terms of remedies. You want to have something for treating shock and stress. So some good nervine herbs, perhaps some distress remedy or rescue remedy, something for fighting infection, both topically and internally. Diarrhea or constipation could be a big problem in an emergency. Bleeding could be a big problem in an emergency, so something that you can use topically and internally for bleeding. Something for pain, and also for inflammation. And then, of course, you have to consider specific health needs of your family. If your family anybody in your family like has asthma or some other problem like that, that you need to make sure you have remedies for that. Now, I have an article that I've been working on that I will make active, hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks, on my website, modernherbalmedicine.com, with some actual suggestions for different remedies, herbal remedies for a first aid kit and how to use them. I'm going to start posting some more information on preparedness, and I'll be linking it back to the page that this webinar is on, so as additional resources to get more information about preparedness. These are some of the remedies that I like to have on hand. I really like capsicum and lobelia. Capsicum, of course, is good for bleeding. It's helpful for pain. Lobelia can be very helpful for pain. It can be administered as an emetic in case of food poisoning. It can stop asthma attacks. It's very strong antispasmodic. I like tea tree oil as a topical disinfectant. I like peppermint oil or catnip and fennel to settle digestive problems. I like Nature's Sunshine's Silver Shield, both in the liquid and the gel form. There's also the Aquasol Silver, which is the same product that you can get. Activated charcoal is amazing. I learned from Sam Kaufman that activated charcoal is really good to dump on wounds to draw out infection. It's fantastic for diarrhea. It can be used for drawing out venom in insect bites and stings. It can be used for treating, food or chemical poisoning. It's awesome stuff. I would never be without activated charcoal in a first aid kit. I keep iodoral, or in my kits, which is a tableted iodine. You could also use Lugol solution or some other form of iodine. The reason I use the iodine is because in case that there was a problem with radioactivity, you want to be able to take potassium iodide to protect your thyroid from radiation. Plus, it can help your body fight infection as well. So I think it's really handy. I like homeopathic arnica for treating sprains and swelling and bruises. And I love the distress remedy from Nature's Sunshine, which I helped them formulate, or rescue remedy, the Bach flower remedy for helping people with shock, distress. I also carry Nature's Sunshine's high potency garlic because it has stabilized allicin. And so I think it's a really good thing for fighting infection, and also echinacea. I carry Taifu oil and Taifu massage lotion, which is also like tiger balm or white flower or olbus, which I think is really good for respiratory problems and rubbed in topically for pain. I have a Nature's Sunshine blend called IF Relief, which I find really good for treating pain with injuries. And another one I like is ALJ for respiratory stuff. I have a lot more herbs in my kits, but I am thinking in terms of being able to, like I said, not just take care of me, but also be able to be of assistance to the community in the event of some kind of emergency or disaster. Now you notice that I put food way down the list. If you're going to start in terms of preparation, start with some basic things. Make a little emergency evacuation kit with some first aid supplies and some of the kinds of things that I said. Water purification, something to provide shelter or whatever. That would be your first step. That would be, I'd say, the minimum that everybody should do. Even the United States government thinks you should do that. So that's pretty minimal, because a 3-day kit of materials and things that would help keep you alive, while you're waiting for rescue or assistance to arrive, or that would allow you to bug out quickly in the event of an emergency and have something to tide you over, is the basic thing that you should really consider. What I am thinking is that you also should probably anticipate that if we do have one of these, a major economic crisis, it's probably smart to at least have food on hand to feed you and your family for 30 days. Now you want at least 3 to 10 days of that to be stuff that you really don't have to do much to prepare. You can just eat it, because in the original stages of an emergency, you don't want to have to think about food preparation. You just want to have something you could eat. For longer term storage, you can think in terms of foods that you would cook. And if you're going to be cooking, you need to figure out how you're going to cook. If the power's off, how are you going to cook? Now, if you have a camp stove, that would be one way. If you have a fireplace, and some wood, or a wood stove, that'd be another one. If you have an outdoor barbecue grill with a good, full propane tank, or plenty of charcoal briquettes or something, just some way to cook. And of course, you probably have cooking and eating utensils anyway, but you're going to need that to prepare for it. So for short-term foods, I like to have things and that are high density canned foods that you don't need to cook that you could just eat, like tuna fish. I have quite a few cans of tuna fish. It's tuna that has the pull top. You don't even need a can opener. You just pull the top, or you can get it in the little bags that you can just tear it open and eat it. Same thing with little cans of sardines. You may not like sardines, but they're awfully nutritious, high in protein, high in fat, and you know, really be a good, you know, easy to eat thing. You can also get military rations, MREs. Don't work so well if you're like me trying to avoid gluten and sugar and all that kind of stuff because they're full of stuff, but they're easy to eat. The picture here is an MRE, but you can get MREs, and like I said, I put them in my kids' kits because they're just easy to use. Energy bars would be a good idea to have. Maybe some crackers. So crackers would go well with the canned tuna, or maybe some peanut butter. You know, I'd try to store the peanut butter or the nut butter, almond butter, or whatever. If you're in an earthquake zone, in plastic containers rather than glass containers, so they don't break. Honey would be another little thing, a little bit of honey with the nut butter. How about some nuts or dried fruits? You know, that would be another thing. You're going to have to rotate, though, nuts and dried fruits because they'll go bad. So you can buy the trail mix or whatever, and use it to go hiking or snack or whatever, and just kind of rotate the supply so you always have some on hand. And if you know that you're going to be in a place where you're going to have plenty of access to water, and water will not be a problem, then you could store some freeze-dried food. But keep in mind that, you know, you can't guarantee that you're going to have the water to hydrate that if you're, you know, in certain areas. But that's what I'm talking about with short-term foods, is stuff that you could just easily eat, not have to worry about cooking meals or anything, because you'd be too busy with a lot of other things in the initial stages of an emergency. Now, for longer-term storage, you want to think in terms of stuff that are subsistence foods. You're not going to be trying, if you're wanting to have storage for a more extended emergency, you want stuff that you could live on, but not necessarily like gourmet, you know? So the ideal thing is grains and legumes. Now, in the culture I grew up in, they recommended like wheat and powdered milk. I would never drink powdered milk, horrible stuff, and I'm avoiding gluten. So I actually have like rice and corn, and I have millet, I have amaranth, I have some grains. If you got a 25-pound bag of rice, okay? If it's brown rice, it's not going to last as long as white rice. So if you get brown rice, you better make sure you're going to rotate it, that you're going to like eat it and then replace it. But let's assume you got some rice and a 25-pound bag of beans. That may be a very boring thing to eat, but for one person, a 25-pound bag of rice and a 25-pound bag of beans would probably keep you alive for, you know, 4 to 8 weeks in terms of basic subsistence food, just getting something to eat every day. So and that's not that expensive. I bought mine at the health food store with organic things, but you know, if you were on a cheaper budget, I've seen big bags, pinto beans and big bags of rice at Costco. They're relatively inexpensive. All you need is a container to store it in. And these nice little buckets that I have here They used to be horrible because you'd have to pry open the lid and pound it back on. Now they have these lids that you can pound on that you can screw off. The middle part unscrews. You can dig it out and screw it back on. So it's easy to open and close and get it out. So for beyond maybe your first 3 or so days with the easy to eat foods, the next thing I would think about is what's some subsistence food that you could have if you had to sustain yourself for a little bit longer in a more prolonged crisis or emergency. And like I said, a lot of people around the world survive on corn and beans or rice and beans. You know, some combination of legumes and protein that you can, you know, cook up. Now, one of the things you want to think about with that is some spices and seasonings. So what I did with my storage is I actually bought some dehydrated, excuse me a second, onions, celery, carrot, bell pepper, tomato powder, and I've got spices. I've got quite a bit of good selection of spices in my house. So I could dress up those rice and beans by throwing in some dehydrated vegetables, a little tomato powder to make some tomato sauce, different seasonings to flavor it up, to make it chili flavored one time or curry flavored another time or whatever, just so it's not so boring. Honey is a great thing to store. I also went and bought a 50-pound bag of sucanat, freeze-dried sugarcane juice, which I think is a nice thing to have. If you've got the budget for it, which, you know, it's an awfully expensive way to go to buy just dehydrated foods. You know, even though they have them in like 5 those big cans. I think it's easier to go with the bulk stuff and maybe just get a little of those for variety. I also, there are certain things I like to keep on hand, like if you like, I use a lot of canned tomatoes, so I go to Costco and buy organic canned tomatoes, organic canned tomato paste, organic canned diced tomatoes, and I rotate through, so I always have a couple of cases of those on hand. I like to occasionally have some chili, so I'll like have a case of chili and, you know, buy that once in a while, or like I said, canned tuna or whatever. It's also extremely important to store some salt. Salt is good for a lot of things, preserving food and so forth. So you want to keep some salt on hand. I actually bought a 25-pound bag of real salt and stuck it in my storage. I figure it's a good thing to you know, trade with other people or so forth. You want to think about lighting. When I first moved to the house where I live in Leeds, there was a problem with the power lines going into the area, and the power went out like 3 times in the first year, and a couple of times it was out for a couple of days. So I got a little emergency backup heater for my house because it got cold. I always have some candles and flashlights around, and you can get these nifty little things. They're not too expensive. I think the one I have pictured here, I bought one, and I think it was $35. It's basically a flashlight radio system. So it has a radio in it, has a flashlight in it, and it can be charged by the little solar panel at the top, by the little crank generator at the side, or it can have batteries in it. So basically that's a nice thing to have for lighting, for news or whatever, and so forth. So that was something I considered was a nice little thing to invest in for my own. Okay, now this is really, really important. you ought to have some cash. In my little kits, I have cash because, like I said, what happens if you go and your ATM card doesn't work, or the power's down and you can't, you can't swipe your credit card or your ATM card? Just some regular cash, the Federal Reserve notes would be good. You you may even find some silver coins. Gold coins are really, really expensive, but silver coins are a little easier to get, and maybe a little easier to trade with because they're having gold coins would be like carrying around $1,000 bills and trying to break them, whereas silver coins is more like carrying around 20s. But you also think about in an emergency, are there things you could trade with people? So like I said, I've got extra salt. Sugar would be something a lot of people would want because they're sugarholics. So maybe you don't eat refined sugar like me, but it might not hurt to store some refined sugar. It's fairly cheap to buy a big bag of refined sugar and stick it in a bucket and it'll last virtually forever. Because you could trade it with other people. If it, have some coffee or tea, but coffee more likely that you could trade. In a lot of cases in a emergency or barter economy, cigarettes were items that were used like money. So I don't smoke, but I've seriously considered getting a couple of cartons of cigarettes and seeing if I could wrap them up and throw them in some kind of airtight container to have as bartering things, except for the fact that I live in an area where not a lot of people smoke and not a lot of people drink alcohol. I did buy a bunch of booze, but I bought it so I could make tinctures, not not so I could barter with it. Ammunition is good for trade. Hard candy, or just have some extra food. Something that you can trade with neighbors for things that you want. Someone said painkiller meds. Yeah, I think that would be another thing to have. Like, I don't use ibuprofen or Tylenol or that kind of stuff, but if you had some bottles of that stuff on hand, there's probably a lot of people who would need that. You could use it. Because I've thought about this a lot. I mean, I'm talking from the standpoint that I, for 35 years, have thought about the kinds of questions that I asked you at the beginning of this presentation, or actually not the beginning, towards the middle of this presentation about, well, what if? And I've really concluded that skills are even more valuable than supplies. One of the things I long ago concluded is none of us are going to survive a major problem on our own, either a natural disaster or an economic collapse or other severe problem. You aren't going to make it by yourself. You're going to best make things if you can team up with other people, because it's impossible for me to acquire all the skills and be good at everything. I mean, I have a lot of skills, but there are other people who have a lot of skills that I don't. So you want to form community and you want to have some things that you could barter with. One of the things that I thought of early on is what happens if you're a computer programmer and you don't even know how to cook, and suddenly you have an emergency where you can't go to the store and the system's shut down and you're stuck inside for a little while. What are you going to do? You don't know anything to do. I mean, if you don't even know how to cook, how do you do that? So knowing, for example, like I do, first aid, and knowing about herbal medicine, and knowing about local edible and medicinal plants. I mean, even I was just down in California a couple of weeks ago, met all my kids and we went to Disneyland, and I have two of my kids who live, right near downtown LA, and I'm walking down the street and seeing edible and medicinal plants growing all over the place in downtown LA. Okay, there's always stuff around if you know what you're looking for. So if you have some skills, where you could help sick people if they can't get to the doctor or hospital, that's a very valuable thing to have, to build friends, knowing local edible and medicinal plants. One of the things that may happen is, even though we may have, I don't think that it's doomsday as far as the economy goes, because I believe that the government will step in and do things to prop things back up again. But like I said, there will be a period of time when things first start coming unraveled, that will be somewhat chaotic. And when they do come back online, we may have to be a little more self-sufficient, because if the US dollar stops being the world's reserve currency, we're not going to be able to buy cheap things from other countries like we've been able to do. And so prices are going to go up, and people are going to need to start going back to some of the skills that our ancestors had that a lot of people have forgotten, such as canning, putting up your own food at home, or growing a garden for some vegetables. In World War II, people were encouraged to grow victory gardens, to grow vegetables, to help, support the war effort. I mean, we may need to start thinking about, growing some, of our own food. Of course, if with the whole GMO thing and all of the pesticides and all that other stuff, one of the reasons why I want to grow food is just because I want to know that I'm getting food that's safe. Sewing, I mean, knowing how to fix something, mend something. A lot of people, anymore don't know how to make, not only don't know how to make clothes, they don't know how to fix clothes, okay? People who know how to build things, if you know how to build things, know how to repair things, very valuable skills. Also, if you have leadership ability, just, consider, if you don't have any tradable skills that you could use, that you could fall back on, can you develop some? I mean, one of my goals is to help people develop the first aid and herbal medicine and edible and medicinal plant skills. I mean, that's, one of the things I teach. I actually love canning. I love gardening. And like I said, when I promoted this webinar, if the response was good, I was considering putting up some additional programs to teach some of the other skills. But I think that the skills are valuable because you want to get together with people in the community, and you want to see if you can find some like-minded people that you can do. In other words, think community. Years ago, one of my uncles said, that just, I've got a gun, and wait, and if they come try to get my food storage, I'm ready for it. And I got this vision of my uncle in a pillbox made out of wheat sacks, sitting on top of his house, surrounded by barbed wire, ready to shoot anybody who came to get his food. And I thought, that's not the way it's going to work. Anybody who takes that attitude, hungry people are going to overrun you and steal your stuff and probably kill you in the process. The community thing is the way to go. You want to think in terms of, do you belong to a church? Do you, what kind of social groups do you belong to? Can you get some other people who recognize that there may be some problems to prepare with you, to develop different skills, so that you have people that you can fall back on and work with? Like I said, I have the first aid kit, and some of the things, and one of the things I plan to do if there's an emergency is go around and offer first aid to people, because you want to build relationships. You want to pull people together. That's really, really critical in something like this, and especially considering some of the the way things are, going in society. So I wanted to mention Sam Kaufman. I met Sam Kaufman at a herbal resurgence conference in Arizona, and he did a scenario there, and I was really impressed because he talked about survival from a community standpoint rather than a every person for themselves standpoint. So I actually had always wanted to go to a survival school, so I went to Sam's survival school last year. But he gave, one of the things he teaches, and I hope he won't mind me just sharing his ideas, but is that there are four areas that you do. You have the scouts, which are the people who protect the community and make connections. Go out, find, scout for resources, make connections with other people, and so forth. They're also like the military people, the guards of the community. Then he says you have your hunter-gatherers, which are the people who gather and prepare food to feed everybody. You have your primitive engineers, which are the people who actually can build shelters, repair things, set up water systems, do that sort of thing. And then you have your medics, the people who are taking care of the health and the first aid. And then, of course, the leaders who are coordinating all that. So we had a scenario, and we actually had to divide into teams. We had a medic team, a primitive engineer team, hunter-gatherer team, a scout team, and we had to play out the scenario. And it was really useful, and it's become the thing that was valuable to me is to think in terms like if you had an emergency, you pull together with people in your neighborhood and say, okay, look, here are some of the things. We need some people who can help protect the area. We can need some people who can help be in charge of procuring food, who here knows how to fix things, repair things, can help us with shelter and so forth, who has first aid or medical skills, so forth. So it became in my mind a way of thinking about organizing people to work together in an emergency. And that's one of the things I really loved about Sam. I highly recommend his school, The Human Path, as well as the fact that he started the Herbal Medics chapter of the American Herbalist Guild, which is devoted to the idea of teaching the herbal medics to be prepared for emergencies, which is something that I'm, of course, very interested in. The biggest thing in all of this, though, and this is why I really stress, this is not about panic. The last thing I want to do is have everybody, have people listening to this webinar and running out and panicking. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Panicking means that you're not prepared. If you start to panic thinking about emergencies, then you need to sit down and think, instead of panicking, I need to prepare. I need to think about what I would do and start making some plans and putting some things in place and doing this. And one of the things that I have learned to do, because I've been through a number of crisis situations in my life where it looked like, some really difficult things were going to happen, is to look down and think through, okay, what's the worst that could happen in this situation? I could die, I could starve to death, I could be homeless, whatever. Okay, if that happened, if the worst thing that happened, what would I do? Well, if I'm dead, I have nothing to worry about. What would I do if I was homeless? What would I do if this? And I sit there and I think through a worst case scenario, and I come to terms with, well, this is what I would do, and then I have nothing to fear. I've already figured out what to do for the worst. Now let's plan for the best. And that's one of the ways I handle emergencies. I just and because I think about these, I've thought about these things, I think in terms of preparation rather than in terms of panic. So there are some times when I look at this and go, I need more preparation. I just calm myself down. But learning how to quiet your mind, how to go into a kind of meditative state and hold your inner peace when things are in turmoil is probably the biggest skill that you would need. And this is one of the reasons why I teach emotional healing, is because not only will we need first aid in in any kind of emergency situation. But we also need people who can go out and help people emotionally to cope with things. So if you don't know how to pray and then meditate to get answers, I was really fortunate, about 40 years ago, I got the idea that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. And if you want to have a conversation, you've got to listen, not just talk. And I learned how to quiet myself in meditation and get guidance when I'm having problems. Allow the ideas and the answers and things to flow to me. And so if you do your inner healing work, then you could be prepared to be of assistance rather than all in a panic and what am I going to do, blah, 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 because you're thinking in terms of not just yourself, but in helping others and creating community and doing that kind of thing, which is what I'm trying to encourage. So the psychological preparation to have the idea that if difficult things happen in this world sometimes, and if I'm, made some preparations, had some thought, and I'm not just totally dependent on the system, and I think I have some skills or things to contribute, then I'm going to feel much more comfortable and have a lot better time coping with an emergency than if I've made no preparation. So I would encourage all of you to, not, put it off, to start thinking about this, come up with a plan, implement it one step at a time. You don't have to run out and do everything all at once, maybe go buy your backpack and make a list of some supplies you want in it, some first aid supplies, start gathering the stuff together. Maybe get that bucket of rice and a bucket of beans or something like that to have on hand. But just do some things to just start getting prepared, because if you are prepared, you are not going to fear. Now, these are some resources I have in the notes that you can look up, for more information. I really love Cody Lundine's books, especially When All Hell Breaks Loose. I've read all Tom Brown's books and so forth. I encourage you to join the Herbal Medic chapter of the AHG, or join their Facebook page to look at that. Some of my courses are there. I need to put a link on here. I forgot to put a link on here to Sam's school. I've shared a few of his links about some of the courses he has. If you're younger than I am, the wilderness survival class kind of kicked my behind, but if I was a little younger, I'd take his Herbal Medic course, which is pretty intensive, and learn how to do like the survival, first aid kind of stuff to combine with herbal knowledge, because I think that would just be an awesome skill to have for emergencies. But yeah, like I said, I'll be posting on the page where the recording for this goes some of these and other links to some of these and some other resources, as well as expanding on them for the future. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the webcam back on and go to the question and answer session. And some people have made some comments here, so I was going to I already pointed out, someone said that painkillers would be a great item to have for trade, and I think that was a great suggestion. And that seeds were be good for trade. Yeah. One thing about having seeds, okay, if you've never grown a garden and you have seeds expecting that you're going to somehow miraculously grow a garden in an emergency, and you've never grown one before, be in for a shock. It can be a lot harder than you think it is. So I would suggest, if you're thinking about having a garden, that you have a garden before there's an emergency. In fact, that was one of the things that I did in my teenage years, is I started thinking about, what would happen in these circumstances. So like, I actually tried eating edible wild plants. I figured the time to start, and one of the things that got me started in herbal medicine is I actually didn't get started because of my health issues. I got started from the standpoint of what would we do if there were no doctors? What would we do if the medical system, broke down for one reason or another? And so I started off experimenting with herbs with the thought, well, I can always go to the doctor if this doesn't work. But what I found is that as I did the herbal stuff, it often worked faster and worked so well that I never had to go to the doctor. Someone says we need a webinar on how to save seeds and how to get your own seeds out of your produce. People don't know this anymore. Yeah, I actually would recommend, found this great catalog, Baker's Creek Heirloom Seed Company. I should probably put a link to them. And they have some huge catalog of heirloom seeds, which are seeds that which will grow true to their kind, and which you can harvest the seeds. And they actually do have information on how to harvest the seeds. Someone said, regarding treating water, 1 tablespoon or 1 teaspoon per gallon of water. It's 1 teaspoon per gallon. I said I put a tablespoon. I probably put a little more than a tablespoon because those are 5-gallon containers. So basically you need 1 teaspoon per gallon to store it. Someone said they have a 5-gallon bucket of a 3-day food supply to give away to a family in need. Okay, well, maybe if somebody is in need, they can let me know, and you can email me privately, and maybe I can connect you up with that. How do you store the paper items so that mice, it says nice, but I assume you meant mice don't nest. I have some storage racks, and I haven't had the mice get into my paper products because I put them like way up top on wire racks, and I haven't had a problem with getting into it. But if I did have a problem with that, I would probably put some paper, some toilet paper and paper towels into a big plastic container. You have the plastic storage containers. You can buy at pretty much any not Walmart or Kmart or Target or any place like that. You can get those, and then you could stick them inside one of those so that you have a tight-fitting lid, and that will keep the mice. Okay, so mice will chew through plastic, get galvanized containers. Well, so far I haven't had problems with the mice in my house chewing through plastic. Someone says they don't like pure peppermint oil. Yeah, the peppermint oil will help chase the thing. Oh, the silver, the silver shield. If you want to use the silver shield or the Aquasol silver to treat your water, you put a teaspoon per gallon into the water containers when you store the water. I use purified water rather than chlorinated tap water, and then I add the silver to help keep it from going bad while it's in storage. Someone said, could you use a silver coin? And probably yes. I mean, that's what pioneers used to do, is you drop a silver dollar into a container of water and it would keep it from going bad. You could do the same thing with the buckets, which would be a good way to have a little emergency cash on hand hidden in your water supplies, So let's see what else people have said here. Let's see. Some said Always can lots of food you grow or get through co-ops or CSA places, even chicken and beef stock to make all kinds of soups and stews. Cornell Extension's 4-H places actually started last year here, programs for people to learn how to do canning and growing their own food. Yeah, personally, I think that where we're headed in this country, that a lot of people are going to need to go back to doing these kinds of things to save money, to survive. I think we've had a lot of luxury in this country for a long time, and we may find that we have to be tighter, and we may need to think more about some of these things. And but the other part of it is you go to a farmer's market. Like there's a good farmer's market here in St. George. I can buy a great big boxes of tomatoes or peaches or apples or whatever, and I go home and can them. And I know what's in them, and they're not, they don't have preservatives, additives, blah, 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 blah. Of course, I have to wash the produce because not all of it's organic, but nonetheless, it's a great way to know what you're eating, which I think is a heck of a lot healthier than relying on what you get at the grocery store per se. One of the things I forgot to mention on this thing was that health is a big thing. You want to make sure that you're taking good care of your health because, in an emergency, you want good health. That's one of the things you're going to be depending on is the health of your body. So if you're having some problems, if you need to do some exercise, if you need to lose some weight, whatever, good. That's another good thing to think about in terms of prepare. Someone said, is the IF relief used for pain of a sprain on the knee, or such as a torn ligament or bruised muscle from lifting too much weight during exercise? Any kind of pain that's associated with inflammation, I found the IF relief works really well for. After I had my gallbladder out, I took the pain medications they gave me from the hospital for about a day or two, and they were making me feel so horrible that I actually went off them cold turkey and just started taking IF relief, and it worked better for me. I also had an office manager who had to have all of her front teeth pulled, and after about a week, she was still in pain. She was still hurting. I gave her IF relief, and within 24 hours, she was out of pain, and the injuries were healing faster. That's why I like that particular formula as a pain reliever. I have some stronger pain relieving herbs in my supplies, but that's a good one for just kind of general pain, mostly brought on by injury, and that's what I'm assuming I'd be dealing with in an emergency is mostly pain due to injuries that people would have. Someone said they just purchased a Berkeley water filtration system. I've heard good things about those. I've never owned one, but I know that Thomas told me that they work really, really well, and I think that would be an excellent water purification thing to have for a family of 4 for a long-term emergency. That when I mentioned, bigger water purification systems, that was one of the ones that I definitely had in mind. Someone said, how do you survive a nuclear attack? I don't know. I think that if you're really close to where the bomb hits, I think you'd probably want to hope that you're at ground zero and not a little farther away. But from a distance, if you're not like near the epicenter of the atomic explosion, that's one of the reasons why I keep iodoral on hand, is because I think it would be one thing that would help you in that particular case. How long between rotation with hard plastic water containers? It would probably be a good idea to once a year drain them and refill them. I'm sure that the water could keep longer than that, but I think just because they would maybe start to leach more of the chemicals from plastic and stuff like that, it would be a good idea to change the water out at least once a year. Someone suggested to teach your children from a young age. That's a good thing. Someone says, I've heard a lot about the Container Store for containers. I've walked through a Container Store. It would be a very good place to get containers. Curcumin, yes, curcumin would be another good thing to have on hand for pain, and so forth. Someone said they've listened to my webinars and learned about herbs and psychology. However, I never knew that you knew so much about being prepared for emergencies. I didn't learn a lot tonight since you've already echoed our feelings and research back to us. However, if you would ever consider contributing to our blog, okay, yeah, I'd be happy to contribute to your blog. Yes. Potassium iodide, yeah, for the radiation, but that's why I have the iodorols, because it's each tablet has 7.5 milligrams of potassium iodide and 5 milligrams of just straight elemental iodine. Someone says the Berkeley company sells a bottle of drops that preserves your water for up to 5 years. Yeah, I actually think that the silver would probably, keep the water pure for quite a few years. It's just a good idea to do things. I've never tried coconut oil as a toothpaste. The toothpaste I would use in an emergency is baking soda and salt. That's what I would use as a tooth powder, not a toothpaste, in an emergency situation. Well, thanks everyone for participating in tonight's class. I hope you got some valuable ideas from tonight's class. Like I say, I want to post some more things. I've always been interested in preparedness, and I've always tried to be prepared, but right now I'm more concerned than ever that I'm seeing the signs that we're headed for some imminent problems. And so this is why I wanted to hold this webinar, because I think it's really important right now. If you haven't started being prepared, it's time to start getting prepared. And I want to help as many people as possible to be prepared physically, psychologically, and so forth. So thank you for participating tonight, and if you know other people who might be interested in this, please feel free, once the recording is up, to share the recording so we can get this message out to the people who need to hear it. Thanks again, and good night.